I really enjoyed. We'll just go ahead and start. Um, we've got Jonathan Laird here, from all the way from Scotland, right, John?
Yeah, Scotland. So northeast of Scotland, little town called Turriff, middle of nowhere. So 40 odd miles west, northwest of Aberdeen.
Okay, I'm gonna like nod and pretend like I know where that is. Um, I still haven't been to the UK, eh? Like
It's
apparently when
cold.
you,
It's cold, mate. That's all you need to know.
well, I'm in Wisconsin. I think we got you beat. But
Okay, good
when
point.
when we're when Australians finish high school, it's pretty much a rite of passage. You finish high school, you go over there, you make a fool of yourself in the UK. But I ended up going to the States instead, and I still haven't made it over to the UK. But so I read an article on LinkedIn that John wrote. Is it okay if I call you John, Jonathan?
Jonathan's my name. My mother will correct you to Jonathan, but she's not here, so it's Johnny to my friends.
We'll slide it in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was looking on LinkedIn. I saw this article that Jonathan wrote about being a prescribing pharmacist, in Scotland NHS, as I understand it, and he gave a sort of balanced approach. Whereas in Australia, we see the AMA fighting with the Australian Pharmacy Guild, and about the dangers of having prescribing pharmacists, and they need to go back to school and all this good stuff. And John actually is a prescribing pharmacist with what it sounds like, and we'll get into this in a little bit. Uh, Very little in the way of precaution, from what it sounds like, and or limitations, I guess. And John gives a really balanced sort of thing. I say, yeah, it could be risky. It's just lucky that we're very precautious, but it could be done different. So I reached out to John. John was like, yeah, let's have a yarn, and so here we are. So thanks for setting
Pleasure.
this up,
Yeah,
John.
yeah.
Appreciate it.
No, I do. I recognize the article you mentioned, and yeah, it's so I think I know there's a bit. Well, I've heard through the ether that there's a bit of a tete-a-tete going on in Australia,
Yeah,
between our medical colleagues and so on and so forth. I think just because you can doesn't mean you should in prescribing. And you referred to the fact that independent prescribing in this country for allied health professionals. Yeah, sure, it is open-ended. You can, I mean, I can prescribe basically anything. There's a small list of exceptional items that I'm not allowed to prescribe, but in on the whole, most prescription-only medicines, including controlled drugs, can be prescribed. Now,
that's
just
amazing. That's amazing.
yeah,
You're like
yeah.
this scary Scottish face that Tony Bartone sees in his nightmares.
I need to meet Tony. I need to meet him. I need to meet him because it's just it goes back to what I said there now. So it's just because you can doesn't mean you should. And
Yeah.
it was quite, I mean, for pharmacists in this country, it was a completely momentous decision to allow us to be initially supplementary prescribers and then independent prescribers. So I don't know if all your listeners will be familiar with what a supplementary prescriber is.
No, go into it, please.
So basically, that's how prescribing started. So with pharmacists, so a supplementary prescriber is where you enter into a kind of like a partnership agreement with a medical prescriber. So let's say I was managing a cohort of asthmatics. That care plan that you agree with the medical prescriber to be a supplementary prescriber would have various parameters. So you might say, if one of your patients needs more than 2 courses of oral steroids per year, then the pharmacist's out. That's no longer within your remit, for example. And there's various other, it's really up to it's an agreement between the medical prescriber and the supplementary prescriber as to how far that agreement goes, or
Hmm.
indeed conversely how limited it is. But what they found was, well, my opinion on that was basically that was a faff. Um, and then basically independent prescribing came in. Now, the reason I wrote that article and my my concern in the area of independent prescribing is that not that things are moving too fast, but that some of the systems and procedures that are really commonplace in the medical profession just maybe aren't quite there yet for us. So I'm thinking of, like things like competence frameworks, um,
Uh,
pharmacists being okay with quite undifferentiated risk. We're quite, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but we're quite protocol driven. And when you're a prescriber, sure you can stick to protocols to a degree, but you at the end of the day you have to decide, look, am I going to prescribe or not? And that's not a kind of certain decision. You have to make that decision and knowingly make that decision and understand that you may have to justify that decision.
yeah,
So yeah, so part of that article was really my concern that we need to do a lot more work collectively as a profession in this country to kind of make sure we are justifying and proving our competence. Um,
yeah, yeah.
and it might be interesting for your Australian listeners to understand that uh, there's been a lot of political pressure in England, Wales, and Scotland, and actually Northern Ireland now, so across the UK, to push pharmacists to be prescribers and to work more closely in the multidisciplinary team and so on and so forth. And that's absolutely brilliant. But
Yeah.
my point again is, let's just
Take it
pause,
easy.
take it
Yeah.
easy. Let's just, if we're going to do this, we've got to do it right. We've got to plan for the worst case scenario. Um, and I think the big thing that I keep sort of advocating for is to make sure that every independent pharmacist prescriber is at the very least consciously incompetent.
Right,
Because
right.
if you're unconsciously incompetent, we've got big problems then.
So the thing, I got a couple questions with that, because I'm looking into the practice, what is it, collaborative practice agreements in the States and how that came to be. Because the reason for all of this, of course, is that there's too much pressure on the GPs and there's not enough availability. So I'm guessing it's a similar case where you're at too, yeah?
Absolutely, that's what's driving
Right.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the States, I think it was 95 when they got the CPAs going, where it sounds similar to what you guys, but with in a sort of restricted level to only certain prescriptions. Um, and then you guys had a big push politically, and now we're kind of getting the same sort of, there's a battle going on in Australia, and I'm like, well, how does it play out? So this is why I started going down this rabbit hole. So in where you're at in Scotland, were there was there a big pushback from the GPs that had to be overcome, that were speaking about the potential threats that you're talking about right now?
So I should caveat my answer by saying I'm N equals one, although I do run a UK pharmacy publication. So I've got pretty good insight into the market.
Yeah.
Honestly, the broad answer is no. Um, and I think the Danish economist Martha Bosserup said necessity is the mother of invention, and this really is this move for allied health professionals to be prescribers and take on more advanced roles. It's really a necessity now. It's not. It's all, the choice has almost been taken away from medical colleagues now.
Right.
Now, the demographics of that, especially the GP population, is that a lot of them are retiring. So perhaps publicly they're saying nothing and actually voting with their feet. But to be honest, there's been a lot less sort of pushback than uh, than I would have thought.
Australia, at least. Less
Oh,
pushback than
definitely,
Australia,
yeah.
at least.
It
Yeah.
hasn't. The touch paper hasn't lit. I think maybe I could foresee some tension where maybe where roles aren't defined properly. You know, I don't think we really know what the role is, and if we're talking about general practice, I'm not sure we really understand what the role is yet. So there
Mm,
could be some tension there.
right.
Um, but but it's not anything like. I mean, it's not been played out in public like it is in Australia. So
Right.
so I'm quite grateful for that because obviously pharmacists get a chance to show, how risk, to be honest, how risk averse they are. We're really, the problem with pharmacists is getting them to pull the trigger and write prescriptions. It's not actually that they'll go daft. Um,
Hey, mate, I'm in a sales training company. You don't got to tell me. No, it's something I've really come to appreciate a lot about pharmacists. I think that sort of um, moral bottleneck, I want to call it, in terms of sales, right? It's just a really amazing, perfect thing, right? And I think it speaks like there's a company in Australia with a brand called Ethical Nutrients, which I come to appreciate every year so much more. Like that's brilliant marketing to pharmacists, like to call your company ethical to people who are just so ethically motivated is just phenomenal.
mm.
So yeah, I'm very appreciative of that, and it sounds like we should be happy to have Tony Bartone lighting his hair on fire every 5 minutes, from what sounds of what you're saying.
I think he's got a point, and I
Yeah.
understand, like I understand where he's coming from. But I'd probably stand up all day and argue with him that pharmacists are you know have all the skills that that maybe not the enough training or the right type of training collectively yet, but there are certainly individuals that are practicing that are very safe.
Well, this
Um,
to scale it back a little bit, like the policies paper that the Pharmacy Guild of Australia released, they're the two gods that are battling are the AMA, the Australian Medical Association, and the Australian Pharmacy Guild. Um, the guild is saying that we want to start small with OCPs, oral contraceptive pills, and more vaccines. Like that's how they're like, that's it. We want to start there, see how we go, and then try and expand it to that. And the AMA is, is scared because I think there's a funding thing happening too that even though the system is overwhelmed, the doctors are thinking that their jobs are being taken away to the point. But now it's to the point where the AMA recently are saying, which I don't think is a bad thing, but it's only a pharmacist can own a pharmacy in Australia. And so they're like, maybe a GP can own a pharmacy. But I don't think that really, or no, as well, a GP can also buy a pharmacy. But I don't really think that tackles the problem. First, there's not going to be that many doctors that are going to buy pharmacies to solve the problem. And secondly, there's a lot of pharmacists that own a building and work in tangent with a doctor, with a GP, right? So they already work in conjunction. It's not that much in terms of introducing extra competition. We certainly don't want the sort of drive-through CVS Walgreens model that the US has either. So
yeah.
it's a tricky spot.
Well, it's a good point you make, Tyson. I think there's two issues there. So there's the business side and there's the professional side. So hitherto, I've been really talking quite clearly about kind of the professional side of things and
Yeah.
the development of competence and all the rest of it. Now, one thing that I get nervous about is when, let's take an example. So independent prescribing pharmacist owns and runs a community pharmacy in the UK, and they run a private on the day minor illness clinic. Now, that for me is problematic if the payment is based on the fact that they have to basically sell something, and that would
Right.
fly in the so you take your viral upper respiratory tract infection, which you'll get hundreds of at this time of year, and you'll be
Mm.
able to give access, and people get to you quicker than they will the doctor, and you'll diagnose lots of viral RTs. And the trouble is with your model where you have to basically write a prescription and sell an antibiotic, for example, to treat that, um, when there's no need for an antibiotic, it creates this conflict of interest. And that for me is what we need to guard against. However, in Scotland, where the grass is green, the sky is bluer, we've got the most. I mean, honestly, your mate Tony needs to come over here and speak to a couple of people, Rosemary Parr and Harry McQuillan and a few other guys on the ground, because they are completely sensible people. They're
Mm,
very organized, very forward thinking with vision, but they're also very cautious.
yeah.
Um, and one of the ways they are proposing to set up payment for community pharmacy is payment by consultation. Now, which I think is excellent. We've already got a minor ailment scheme in Scotland, which is a national scheme, and how that's paid is registration based. So if you think about my first example with the viral RT, the opposite is true. So because a pharmacy's paid to build registrations, there's actually a little bit of a disincentive to actually pull the trigger and prescribe.
Mm,
So I, I can understand. I really can understand the concerns, and I don't think they should just be batted away. I think they need to be faced into. But what I would argue strongly with is that there's absolutely ways around these things,
right.
and there's ways to do these things very appropriately.
So if you could wave a magic wand, Jonathan, you'd still have prescribing pharmacists, but you'd have it a lot more as conservative adoption. What would you do? Like, how would you make it? Like, does the proposals that the guild is putting forward with OCPs and vaccines, which we're already doing, um, um, would that be a place to start?
I mean, I'm not a health economist, so maybe I'm talking absolute rubbish, but it feels like you're not going to get the kind of population level return on that.
Mm,
Um, it's kind of a case of, you gotta if you're gonna do it, do it.
right.
Um, the thing is, if you go all in and do it as they are in Scotland, the procedures and policies and practices around the training and development of the pharmacists will follow, and they are absolutely following. One such example is there's a various competence frameworks that pharmacists now. I mean, this was quite an alien concept for pharmacists to have to demonstrate their competence to do various things, really,
Mm,
especially when working in community pharmacy. But that is absolutely changing. So now, if you don't demonstrate competence and you're an independent prescriber, well, to use an Aussie cricketing term, you're on a bit of a sticky wicket, aren't you?
mm,
Or you could be potentially if you delve into prescribing in a certain area, and you don't have that training and documented supervision under your belt, then you could run into trouble. So my view would be, if I was starting it fresh, I would look very carefully and we're talking community pharmacy here, are we?
yeah.
Yeah, so I would look very carefully at the conflict of interest of supplying, prescribing, and dispensing on the same premises. Although that's not without precedent. There've been dispensing practices in the UK for years. So I wonder, are there dispensing practices in the outback in Australia? I would suggest there are. You telling me that a doctor over there has never prescribed and supplied his own drugs?
I think like I can't speak for the GP side too much, but obviously they have to at some capacity. But we really just got the S2 and the schedule for the S2s and S3s for some of the more benign things that could be abused.
Mm.
Um, so
So
now,
yeah,
but speaking, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, carry on, interrupted. Carry on.
So like when it comes to like there are potential risks. That's why I reached out to you. There's potential risks. What have been the repercussions for such a, you know, you guys have gone 2 feet in. Um, what have been the repercussions in terms of, you know, patients being injured?
Well, as far as I know, there haven't been any high-profile test cases. However, um, there, I would be completely surprised if there haven't been near misses or incidents that have happened, um, with these pharmacists piling into GP practice and so on and so forth in the UK. However, I think it's a cracker of a question, Tyson, and that is that the big sort of question in my mind is, some poor pharmacist in the UK is going to have to, and obviously some poor patient is possibly going to fall foul of this. You know, that poor pharmacist is going to be a test case,
Mm,
and things like, you know, documentation, competence to back up their practice, the interplay between them and the rest of the multidisciplinary team, including the doctor, I suspect will all be called into question when that case comes. Um,
mm.
I'm currently not aware of that at the moment, but unfortunately, the only way your question can be answered, I think, is through the courts. And I just hope when something does happen, um, then that person will be well covered and so on and so forth. But I think the context to that is, you know, the bigger picture view of that is that doctors get it wrong all the time, you know.
Mm.
So we just don't know
That's
how
why we
this.
have pharmacists.
Well, yeah, yeah, and that goes back to my previous point. Pharmacists are
Right,
traditionally, you know, we're like traditionally, to use a soccer analogy, we're like the goalkeepers
right.
in medicine. So I think that's why we're so risk averse. That's always what's in my head as a pharmacist. It's like, right, don't miss anything, don't miss anything, don't miss it. So it's quite hard for a goalie to go into midfield and then you know start to think
Start
about being a
kicking away. Yeah.
yeah, start like I mean, you might take the odd penalty or something, but you're not going to be a striker, are you? You know,
Right.
um, so yeah, that is a really good question, and it's something that's on my mind a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that's the question that if it's, I think politically and with the media today, uh, if you had a really strong GP body in the UK pushing against it, then it would be highly publicized every 15 minutes to say what an awful thing it is. Because I think you've made a really good point. They do have a point. AMA and Tony Bartone has a point. It's still completely omits the from my experience and what you're telling me about the natural personality and the culture of pharmacy to be very very precautious and play that goalkeeper role. So to think that the sky is falling as soon as we have prescribing pharmacists is silly. However, it is what I see us doing in Australia is completely um, delegitimizing their fears. And what I wanted to do is sort of say, okay, well, let's bring these fears out. Let's talk about what the potential problems are, and really tackle them so that we can move forward, so that we can bring it, warts and all, and have a look at what the threats are. So by getting an idea as to, I'll have to look it up. I'll just research it after we do this interview. I have to look up, the level of, I guess, what do you call it? What's the not iatrogenic? Well, I guess the problems with prescribing from pharmacists since its inception. How long's it been going on in the UK?
Good question. Oh, I could
You've
have
been doing it 4 years, right? You've been doing it 4 years.
almost five, yeah.
Mm.
I could check. I think was it 2002 or three, perhaps.
Okay.
15 odd years.
All right.
So it's relatively recent. Yeah.
Yeah. So it to actually paint a picture of what it would look like there would be an increase in, I guess, problematic prescribing. There would be an increase in liability for the pharmacists in terms of insurance and times that they have to defend themselves in court. Um, not sure what kind of problem it is over there, but we've really got to take a real deep look at it and check it out instead of saying that the AMA's fears are illegitimate. So,
I mean, is it their choice? Um, can they stop it? I mean, what if pharmacists do a better job in terms of certain aspects of the care of patients, the demographics and the nature of polypharmacy is absolutely in favor of a pharmaceutical sort of skew to how you manage a patient, so
mm,
I don't know. I guess, in a not very combative way, I would ask the GPs what are they scared of, really. If they want excellent care and pharmaceutical care for their patients, then surely they should be welcoming all the help they could get. Otherwise, it feels a bit like a protectionist piece to me. Um,
Yeah, I think you're not far off there, mate, because I think it's more about, to be crass and perhaps incorrect, at the risk of being completely wrong, I think it's more about a cash grab. I've looked at their suggestions for their pre-budget suggestions, and there's like, of course, it's a budget suggestions from a body that wants more money. So I think they're really worried about losing the capacity of the GPs, whereas the GPs can't see as many people as they need to. So
yeah,
I don't think the fears are illegitimate, but I mean, yeah, I think their reaction to it is hysterical, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't investigate the actual risks, which I think pharmacy is absolutely brilliant at. Like that's what you guys do.
definitely. The other, in the spirit of turning myself from a goalkeeper into a striker, I think the other thing pharmacists in Australia should bear in mind is that, and this is another thing that concerns me, I think we're completely underselling ourselves in the UK. So there's a whole load of non-prescribing pharmacists who suddenly find themselves in prescribing pharmacist roles. There's been a big move from community pharmacy to general practice. Um, and the trouble with that is the level of responsibility is a good few fold higher in general practice. Now, the trouble is, pharmacists have been desperate to do stuff for years, blood pressure checks. We've been on the periphery, we've always been on the outside in community, and now they've got a chance to get into GP pharmacists. They no longer have to apologise for delivering excellent pharmaceutical care. Happy days. And then they get like 4 to 6 months in and they think, bugger, I'm taking massive responsibility here. Similar in many cases to my medical colleagues. I'm under the direct influence of medical colleagues, and actually I'm not getting paid anymore. And I don't wish that to sound cynical, but I just think yeah, it kind of answers your previous question about, if I was doing it again, I would absolutely get pharmacists to collectively stand their ground and be like, no, this is what we can do and this is what it's going to cost.
Right.
Off we go.
So in terms of a consulting fee that they should get paid for doing a consult, just like a GP would. Is that what you mean?
No, I wouldn't say it's as much as a GP, but I
No,
think they
but
need.
just like in the same capacity. Like right now, we do consults all the time. And more consults, like is 3 times as many consults with a pharmacist versus a GP in Australia. So, but yeah, there's no compensation for it unless something's purchased.
Absolutely, yeah, the funding
Mm,
model has to change. And again, if we're back to community, yeah, definitely has to change.
right. So speaking about the patient, what has been like the increase or the decrease in the experience for the patient from a prescribing pharmacist perspective?
Um, I would need to put you in contact with some colleagues who've done research in that area, but
Yeah.
in my own experience for the purpose of this interview, we did in my practice, I did feedback on my practice and on the other pharmacists that work there, and it was all like really positive, very well received. So some people will raise an eyebrow if they have to see a pharmacist instead of a doctor, but I think that's just fear of the unknown. And
Mm.
actually, on a number of occasions, I've had people who have asked to see me instead of a doctor.
Oh,
Hmm.
that's what Tony's afraid of.
That's me being a striker, Tony.
Okay. And
I need to talk to your mate, Tony.
I'm scared of him. He's crazy.
I'm
No,
sure
he is.
he's lovely. I'm sure he's a nice guy.
No, I mean to be fair, I'm reading his media releases and he's kind of this isn't new. Like the AMA and the Guild have been fighting forever, like forever. And everything that pharmacists do is a money grab because we have to, well, I say we, I'm not a pharmacist, but um, it's just the same thing. Like because pharmacists have to straddle that area between retail and healthcare, which it's just like it's to me it's like being a dad and doing the right thing by your kids and having them hate you for it. Like it's the same thing. It's they have to straddle retail and healthcare, and because they do that, and they've got this amazing ethical concern that really helps it to be a good practice. But they continually get called money grubbers or bottle stickers, and everything looks like a cash grab, which is terrible and inaccurate. But at the same time, the AMA has got 27 requests for new money for the pre-budget submission. So it's yeah,
I think I'm always I don't know the Australian situation, so this is probably a highly inflammatory comment, but I always get quite nervous in medicine and pharmacy and business and life when folk get too high up on their moral high horse because stuff costs money,
yeah,
services cost money.
yeah,
That money has to come from somewhere. It either has to come from government through taxes, redistributed, or it has to come from the consumer or the patient. So look,
yeah,
we're all in it together. My If I was taking a helicopter view of the thing, my sort of helicopter view would be, look, much better to understand how the landscape's changing, how demographics are changing, how many more people are on many more medicines, and actually make use of the pharmacist skills, and to be honest, cut a deal,
right.
rather than constantly be bashing against each other, because there's plenty of work for everyone, I think, and I think done right, as it has been in Scotland, um, there's a real win-win there, to be honest.
So you would agree with the way that Scotland has rolled this out? You like the way, but you think it's too much too fast, too much too soon, or you would
So,
do it pretty much exactly the same again if you were the god of the who could make the well, I'm just
that's a big
you
if,
you
buddy.
you can see everything that can go right or wrong because you're in the thick of it. So if it could be done perfectly, how would Jonathan Laird have it happen?
Well, I think the vision and the leadership around it has been like, it's not too much to say world leading, actually.
Mm,
There was a document published here called Prescription for Excellence, and one of the statements in that said that every pharmacist in Scotland should be an independent prescriber. Now, when that came out, that was like turkey on the table time. It was like cat among the pigeons. It was, everyone was like, oh, there's a collective sort of for
gasp.
about for about 2 years, and then everyone calmed down and thought, right, how are we going to actually do this? And since then, there's been a really sensible, logical, careful approach to the thing. Now, the pace of it, you could argue, is too quick. You could argue it's
Mm,
too slow. You could argue that the people running the implementation maybe have never experienced the job, so there's difficulties there. There's all sorts of these sort of barriers that come into play, but I think the overall vision and direction of travel has been done as carefully and as well as it possibly could be, to the extent that after an initial move of pharmacists into GP practice, now actually really encouragingly there are independent prescribers in Scotland, being trained specifically to work in community pharmacy. Um, and I just think that is absolutely fabulous, because I go back to almost all my articles, and all my sort of narrative comes back to the fact that the massive opportunity sits in community.
yeah, so that's sort of the model that they're going for in Australia. So it sounds like you're almost like a resident or a concierge pharmacist working in a GP, well, in a GP's location, whereas in Australia they can be separate, and most of the time they are. So that's kind of where they're going. They want to have these prescribing pharmacists work independent or in collaboration with a GP, but not like separate, like completely separate.
Yeah,
So that would require, in my opinion, it's going to require some education, some training, and a tiered, like sort of rolling it out in a way that the guild is suggesting with, let's start with OCPs so that, when a lady comes in, they start one and it's wrong. And so you go back to the GP, so you can go back to the pharmacist, so you go back to so I remember my wife and I did it when we were younger. It was just a mess. Whereas if you could just go to the pharmacy, let's back it off, try this one, back it off, try this one.
Yeah, I mean, the other aspect of this move to GP practice is you're asking me if I was starting again. Well, I would in Australia, I would probably get pharmacy PLC together and explain to them that when you work in general practice, I would say pharmacists are a welcome guest,
Mm,
and I wouldn't necessarily say it's their home. So I have strategic and political concerns about the long-term impact of that.
right.
Um, a much better approach, in my view, would be to basically do what we're doing in GP practice, but do it in community. Because I think if we lose in Australia, UK, America, wherever, I think if we lose the community pharmacy network, then we really lose what it means to be a pharmacist.
And that's what the guild is for. That's what the guild is really trying to protect. They're really for community pharmacy. So they're really good in that aspect. I think what I think there's a shortcoming in their PR is really just not investigating publicly. And like they have investigated, like they've done the research into the potential precautions that we're going to have to take. What they're not doing is sort of sunlight disinfects. So they're not sort of saying, okay, Tony, let's investigate these problems that you're talking about instead of lighting our hair on fire and running around. And so that's kind of what this meeting was about.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap it up there. I'm going to leave a link to Jonathan's article here and his website. I don't want to go over there. What's your website, mate?
Pharmacyandpractice.scot.
Pharmacyandpractice.scot. Check it out. It's a really good website. Lots of really cool articles and something that we should really pay attention to down under because they're sort of leading the way. And even though it's a very different picture, it's something that we can really learn from. The US system, and the CPAs that they've got here, the UK and Canada too. I haven't opened that can of worms yet.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Yeah, it's been really interesting, and yeah, I still think it's really cool how we can talk to people around the world, and it's like speaking to you as if you're in the same room. It's great.
Yeah, I like it. Hey, thank you so much for your time, John. I got to get going.
Pleasure. See you,
Cheers,
buddy.
mate.